The Russians were closing in, and by that time they were 30 meters the other side of walls. It was pretty much like the end scenes of Saving Private Ryan. They just put paddles on my fingers and then really it just electrocuted me. They also stabbed me in the leg. My name's Shaun Pinner. I'm a former British soldier and Ukrainian Marine that was captured in one of the biggest battles since World War II, Mariupol. My dad died when I was 9, so that had a major impact on my life. My granddad was quite a major role model in growing up, my only real male role model, and he was ex-Second World War, Royal Middlesex Regiment, and told me the stories. I used to spend my summer holidays with them, 6 weeks with my nan and my granddad, and watching old films, things like The Longest Day and The Great Escape, and you know, later on in life, 13 Hours in Benghazi and Bravo 20 and things like that. So I was always had an interest in the military. Well, I joined at 17 and went really after basic training straight to Northern Ireland, Londonderry as it was then. I was only 17 when I got there, so I had to wait a couple of weeks before I was 18 and really started my first patrols on the streets. Quite early on in my career, I went to Bosnia in the early 90s with the United Nations. So that was my first real experience of war. But of course, I spent 9 years in the British military, the Royal Anglian Regiment, spent 9 years learning how to fight Russians. I knew their vehicles, their hardware, I knew their tactics. And really, that's really what I took to Ukraine when I went to Ukraine. But generally, it wasn't really until a second tour to the UN with the British Army, where we went with 24 Mobile to Bosnia, where I got my first experience of resistance training. So we went to America, Fort Lewis in Washington State, where I learned the basics of survival and also how to live off the land, which I loved. That's everything I joined the military for. I left in 2000 really, after 9 years. I missed the military every day. I worked in hazardous waste, run my own business, had some successes, had some failures. But it gave me the kicks I needed. I was invited initially in 2018 to go to Mariupol to help rebuild the military after Russia's annexation of Crimea and their invasion of East Ukraine in 2014. And I had friends in the military still doing that sort of work. And a friend of mine who was an EOD explosive specialist was working out there at the time and said, if you're thinking about changing, come and see what we're all about. Really, I went through a selection process to work with the Ukrainian military as an instructor for 2 years, a sniper instructor for 2 years. 3 of us were accepted into National Guard, and I spent 2 years from 2018 to 2020 working with National Guard of Ukraine. And in those 2 years, I met my wife, got married, had a house on the left bank in Mariupol, paid my taxes in Ukraine, got my residency. So it was very much, home. Suddenly, my family were Ukrainian. I learned Russian first because I lived in Mariupol. It's fair to say most people spoke Russian because Russians don't understand Ukrainian. The atmosphere at the time generally was that it would sort itself out. It was described to me at the time, which I found extremely odd, that we are brothers, somebody said to me, we just argue. And I thought that was extremely odd considering Russia had annexed Crimea and invaded East Ukraine and had spent a large part of 5 or 6 years fighting Russia. My military instinct kicked in and thought this is really bad. And then the technology started to change on the front. In 5 years, Russia hadn't, or the separatists, loosely call them, hadn't had the capacity to really use thermal imagery and drop ordnance at night from drones. That changed. Suddenly we were seeing Russian drones flying over, reconnaissance drones. And then they started to really hit the positions behind us in the main HQs, headquarters of areas that were between us and Mariupol, which then I sort of knew they were softening us up, ready for an invasion. And it became about 2 weeks really of waiting for them to cross the border after they'd softened us up enough. You do stand to, and it was 4 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of February, 2022. And really it's just, you've done it so many times, it becomes a drill. But this time it was the Russian army. So it was really shock and awe from the start. They had complete air superiority. They were using on our position tanks, heavy machine guns, mortars, you name it. I was really surprised after the first day of fighting, roughly about 11 or 12 hours, that we'd actually got off to position with everybody intact. We'd heard positions to the left of the front line crumbling. Russians had already taken positions, moved in and taken prisoners, but my platoon were holding. But I knew we weren't going to hold there for very long. My battle picture told me that we would be moving and defending Mariupol because we just didn't have enough soldiers in the trenches for a like-on-like gunfight. I mean, they hit every government building, schools, hospitals, straight from the first day, including what they thought were the military bases. So they just blanket bombed everything, which was really hard. And I don't remember really thinking much about it until we'd pulled off the front line and got a bit of a respite about 3 days later. Then realised when my phone signal picked up a load of beeps and messages that I was really in the shit and I was the tip of the spear. And at one point, I just remember thinking, my God, we're in it. It's like they're coming up from the Azov Sea, they're coming in from Russia, they're coming up behind us. But yeah, I mean, it was just got to the point around sort of April where we were getting stretched. We were running out of ammunition, food and water. We'd been working every day to hold Mariupol. The encirclement around Mariupol became about 250 kilometers deep, with people saying they were trying to get to us but couldn't. And I think the closest they got was about 70 kilometers away. So, you know, by that time, by the end of March, everything was encircled. So we knew we were fighting for our lives, just hoping at that time that somebody would come in and open up a corridor and get us out. It was obvious the Russians were closing in, and by that time they were 30 meters the other side of walls. We could, you know, it was pretty much like the end scenes of Saving Private Ryan. They were just the others. We could hear them talking Russian. They were coming in through walls, holes in the walls. They were exploring, trying to get in, sending their reconnaissance teams in. Even the drones were coming in 10 feet above the ground, you know, looking in through doorways and windows, trying to find us. It was like Terminator from 1984. It was crazy, you know, to think that when I joined the army that we didn't have phones, to now we've got drones coming in 10 feet above the ground looking for us. It is exactly like that. Around April the 11th, command and control was getting really stretched. And a decision was made that we would try and break out of the steelworks and get to a sister unit that was fighting the Russians on the Azov coast, about 130 kilometers away. It was always going to be ambitious. We'd welded metal plates to lorries and really resembled sort of Mad Max vehicles. And we got on board those and tried to break out of Illich Steelworks. It took 2 attempts before we managed to get out. And then after about 40 minutes driving, we got ambushed quite heavily, first of all by planes, and then artillery were brought in, and then small arms and soldiers were coming in. And I got split up from my platoon in the dark. There was injured everywhere. It was a real mess. So I made the decision to try and get back to friendly lines, which was about 250 kilometers away. And really, that decision, once I'd made it, it put me into a whole new bracket. I wasn't fighting it anymore in that way. It was about self-preservation. It was about each to their own now. My position in Mariupol was lost. Our position was dismantled. And I'd already prepared myself to go and strip down my kit as much as I could because I was carrying a heavy lot of weight. You know, full battle gear, 8 magazines, 50, 40 millimeter Vogs, AK-74, underslung grenade launcher, PKM, 200 rounds. My main fear was really getting out and breaking the first line of the encirclement. But I had to be aware of the drones. And in Ukraine, you're aware of one hazard and then it creates another. So I had to go through buildings to break out of Mariupol, which was going to slow me up, probably less than 1 mile an hour. And use the buildings as cover to avoid the drones. But on the flip side of it, I was then worried about the defense positions and what the Ukrainians had laid in way of booby traps and doors, and now my problem became something else, so that slowed me up even more. I was always cautious of that. Plus I hadn't eaten properly or drunk properly for 7 weeks. My main concern was water. I didn't have any water. So I was looking to try and find food and water en route, and I was eventually captured about 2 hours outside of Mariupol, just leaving a building and going really to a second tier level of a village to try and explore that area, to try and get food and water, and literally walked into a forward observation point from the Donetsk People's Republic, which is like a proxy state of Russia. When I was captured, the initial capture I was always taught was the most dangerous. I'd already stripped down, managed to find a civilian coat, change my bag, try and blend in with the civilians that were still walking around the area. I thought if a drone saw me, if it caught a glimpse of me, I might think I was a civilian. I still had my army gear underneath a big jacket I found. But unfortunately, a shot rang out over my right shoulder. I don't know if they missed me or give me a warning shot, but I was quick enough to really see that they were very close proximity, maybe within 30 meters. It was broad daylight and they had the high ground, and if I had turned around, they probably would have cut me down. So I certainly don't regret the decision. I had to make a decision to either try and keep evading or surrender at that particular point. I managed to drop my phone in some water. I said in my best Russian that I was English, and then said it in English to make sure they understood. And then it was about haggling and negotiating that they wouldn't shoot if I walked forward. I was hoping that really that would get them on the back foot and they realised they'd have some value, because at the initial stage you go through a filter process, but my Russian isn't so good that I could probably get through that. I speak Russian with a London Cockney accent still, so it's very difficult to get through that filtration process. They'll know I'm from out of town straight away. So when I did get beckoned forward and said they wouldn't shoot, it was one of the scariest times. But when I got to the position, they looked more scared than I did. Very young guys. And then I realised I was caught by the very people I didn't want to be caught by. And then really that started my process of capture, really. I was taken to a company position, hooded, and the minute they used masking tape behind my hands, they checked my ID against my face, and just that was where I got my first punch in the face, really. And that's where started my time as a prisoner of war. And I was taken 45 minutes to a room that I called the tiled floor room, which was like a drainage hole in the middle of the floor, and I was bound to the chairs pretty much like this, so I couldn't move. And then before they said anything, they just put paddles on my fingers, and then really it just electrocuted me, which I think was a mobile, like a field phone they used to generate electric current. I think they used this because they kept asking me if I wanted to call home. One of those shocks is very intense. It's enough to knock you really on your ass. You start dribbling, you start twitching with the aftershocks, and then somebody starts asking you questions. Nothing like I expected. It was your MI6, your James Bond, your SAS, while somebody was shouting Condoleezza Rice, the Black Witch of America. You've held Russia back. It was quite intense. They also stabbed me in the leg to stop me from running away. So I was bleeding, and they would kick me on the wound on the leg. And then they would just electrocute you again if they weren't happy with what you were telling them. My training told me they were going to torture me regardless of whether I told them the truth or not. I didn't have any information to give them. So my position was redundant. And when I rolled down my thermal, I was bleeding from the capillaries. They'd electrocuted me so much. I was bleeding out, literally just struggling to stay conscious at that point. But I understood Russian. I knew they were going to move me on quite quickly. I knew that really somebody else was going to be interested in me. And if my training taught me well, then it would be the next person I speak to would be Mr. Good Cop. You know, you had the initialization phase, then they're going to torture you, then they're going to ask you random questions. They're not worried about the truth. They want to just give you the worst possible experience ever. So I knew that I was being moved on. And if I didn't die of a heart attack, I knew that the next person would probably be someone who I would need to sort of rely upon, or he would sell it to me that I'm your friend. You know, it was so predictable. And in between waiting for the transport to take me to the next, I was then tasered and really beaten badly. And then I went on a 2-hour trip to Donetsk. At that point, I met the voice, really, the guy who later called Mr. Balaclava, who, when I got there, told me that they would stitch up my wound. asked me why I'd stabbed myself in the leg, and I was like, no, you guys did that. They said I would find discomfort here, but I would be safe, and they would give me food, and exactly what I expected from my training 30 years earlier. So I got put in an isolation cell. They gave me an injection for the pain, they said, but I can't remember anything after that. And then when I woke up in the morning, there was food on my bed, and there's a massive steel door into the isolation cell, which is like 1 meter by 3 meter, with a buzzer that wakes you up and a buzzer that puts you to bed. There's no window. The light stays on 24 hours a day. And there's death metal playing 24 hours on a loop. And really, I was left for 48 hours in this isolation cell, just told to write an autobiography about my time in Ukraine, which I left out certain elements. And after 2 days, roughly 2 days, I was taken to a room where I was then electrocuted on the ear. I was then beaten. And they told me that I wouldn't receive any more food because I didn't tell them that I'd worked with National Guard as instructor in Azov. So therefore, I mean, their hatred of Azov, the reason I didn't tell them I'd worked with them was because they would shoot you in a car park at the initial captures. After 5 days in isolation, I was then taken to a prosecutor's office where I was then put on the trial by public opinion. I was then started to use for camera work. I didn't know I was going to go to trial, but they were just leading me into a trial. So they wanted to reset Russia's public opinion of me and used cameras. Russia Today were very prominent in my early days of my capture. They are initially the media arm of the Kremlin. And they were asking me questions, Russia Today, Roman Kozyrev asking me questions about why I'm a Nazi and did I bring my guns in from UK. But when we got back to what we affectionately called the black site, where all the nasty things happened, really I was down to what they wanted me to do. The unpredictability of the guards was a real problem. Not so much the interrogations at that point, but just the beatings with the guards daily. And then for 60 days at the black site, I didn't have anything other than bread and water. And we got a great timeline because those early days of the capture, I didn't look too bad. I looked like I'd been fighting for 7 weeks in Mariupol, to be fair. I was tired, but I wasn't emaciated. By the time the sham trial came round, it looked like I'd been in a Japanese war camp because they hadn't fed us. So my back went straight into my legs. My elbows started to protrude because we were just losing the body fat. We hadn't seen the daylight for 60 days and we were so malnutritioned, your skin goes like crepe paper. Now, I thought I was going to die of starvation before I got to any trial. But a few days before the trial, I was then moved to Makivka 97, Makivka prison 97. And then what became apparent was they were trying to give us 2 or 3 days, fatten us up for the trial because we looked very, very bad. And when we went to trial, we looked dreadful. There was just nothing, a shadow of my former self, really. I was angry at the trial. I was trying to keep it all in. I mean, the pictures show you I was immensely, I even had an argument with the judge while we were having a trial where the cameras were stopped. And I was saying, this is ridiculous, you know. We can't say not guilty. I don't understand. We haven't even spoke to a lawyer or nobody's come to take a statement. You know, it was immensely angry. And when that anger goes, when you're in your cell after and you get back and you just think, I'm on death row, eventually you start to calm down and then the different emotions start to rise. Once they'd given me the death penalty at the trial, what can you really do to someone? So they just leave you alone. So I spent the next 2 or 3 months really climbing the walls and trying to stay positive. I was really settling for the new year. I didn't think we'd get out. You know, you hear of these prisoners of war that have been in for years. We got wind that we might be going on an exchange, which totally blew us out the water. And then that was short-lived because we left at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, hooded and tied up. And then we didn't get to Rostov-Don until 10 o'clock the next morning. We were put in stress positions, left on the vehicle, travelled all through the night, not given any food or water. I was beaten to a pulp where I had blood coming down my face and a cut on my eye. And another guy's head swelled up because they'd put the tape around his head and his bag. He couldn't breathe and it cut his blood circulation into his head. So he looked like Homer Simpson, couldn't see his eyes. He was beaten. And when we got there, they removed our hoods. It was clear they were sending us somewhere. And we were in a wing of Rostov-Don airport. And the only people in there really was a couple of military policemen and an older gentleman and some Saudi medical team. We got on the plane and the door shut. And when the door shut, the guy said, "You're part of a prisoner exchange. You'll have a medical, and we're taking you to Riyadh." And so we had this like group huddle, where we were just talking about, okay, we're ready to go. Yeah, we don't know what we're going to, but it's got to be better than where we just come from. And then I was coming out of the changing room after having a wash, a medical, and change of clothes. And as I came out, this guy's talking to my friend John, and he says, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from London." I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "London." I said, "You don't half look like Roman Abramovich." He said, "I am Roman Abramovich." And I was like, that's where the crazy started. We were like, "What are you doing here? What's going on?" And my friend John said, he's wondering why you didn't buy West Ham, and he straight away had just said, "Chelsea's closer to my house." So, he had a good sense of humour. He explained to us, and his team explained to us what his involvement was. And later we learned that 55 Russians were exchanged for over 100 Ukrainians and 10 internationals. And within sort of 24 hours of landing in Riyadh, we were put on a plane out to the UK. And by the 22nd of September, I was being smuggled under the airport at Heathrow, and got to see my family. And that's quite a memorable day because that's my wedding anniversary day. So it's really emotional. And I was able to talk to my wife in September, the 22nd, and last time I spoke to her sometime in late March in 2022 to tell her I was alive. But she wouldn't get to the UK for another 3 weeks because she didn't have a visa and British bureaucracy. So, but they did try and help get her over quite quickly. Well, life after's changed, obviously. I still do a lot of campaigning and a lot of work for Ukraine. And I live in Ukraine, so I work with humanitarian aid groups. It hasn't changed me very much. I'm still committed and vocated to the sovereignty of Ukraine. It's still my family, my friends. So who knows what will happen in the future? Once we realised Iran and North Korea were now invaded and part of the coalition invading Ukraine, we should have sent NATO troops in all the way up to the Dnieper River. I haven't changed my stance on that. I knew last year, I said Trump would sell out Ukraine, and he's looking like he's doing it. It's very poorly done as well. He's picked a side. He's clearly been against Zelensky, backstabbing Zelensky. So it's poorly done. Ukraine wasn't part of the talks, which I find extremely odd. It is worrying that whatever the Kremlin says, Trump seems to be regurgitating and repeating without his own, view. If Russia takes Ukraine, it puts them 6 hours by car to Germany. It puts them 3 hours by plane on a bombing run to London. They will move all their ballistic and nuclear missiles into Ukraine, putting them even less chance of notification of missile launches, ballistic missiles. He will then move on to Poland, Moldova, Romania. So it is important to fight Ukraine in Ukraine, which is why I think NATO troops should have been in a year ago.